Welcome to Inside Social Care, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the care industry. Join us as we explore the challenges, celebrate the triumphs, and shine a spotlight on the incredible people who make up the social care workforce. From personal stories to policy deep dives, we're here to give you an unfiltered look at the heart of our communities. This is Inside Social Care, and this is where we start the conversation. My guest today is the founder and CEO of Belmont Healthcare. He's been a big figure in social care for most of his working career, and he's most recently made some interesting investments and become executive director of Alana, who are transforming care in the community using technology. So I would love to welcome to the podcast today, Adam Hutchison.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. Jump straight in, Adam.
Please do.
Tell us a little bit about your story and how you got to where you are today.
So always been in and around care. My father used to have a care home from, I think, 1991. I was sort of like 10 when he sort of transitioned into running and operations of a company that back then it used to have sort of 40, 50 care homes. And he was doing sort of an operations role. And in 93, they sold a lot of the homes to Travelodge and Travelodges. Right. So a lot of Travelodges in like Manchester, Blackpool, Itham, St Anne's up there are actually old care home sites that they transitioned out. And my father's kind of golden goodbye was these couple of care homes down in Kent, which he kind of ran as a lifestyle business for sort of 20 years. Sort of 2011, 2012, I was working in London doing telecommunications. I had a business, very small, cut people. We used to do a lot like reselling stuff. And he just asked me to help him sell his care homes and so he could retire. And I was always looking for a business that was a lot less transactional, a bit more kind of asset backed. And actually, funny enough, I found some synergies with the sort of staffing in terms of, sounds a bit odd, but call center staff and care staff, but there's a lot of similarities in terms of like high attrition, low pay, not necessarily well supported. So I saw a lot of synergies in that. And instead of helping him sell it, I ended up buying the care home off him in sort of 2014. Yeah, kind of story started from there. He kind of retired off and has a nice seaside apartment down in Bournemouth with his wife. And I took the business on from there. So had the one care home. We've now 8, soon to be 9. We also have a dom care. We had some daycare centres for a bit, but they sort of stopped during the pandemic, never reopened. Yeah, started sort of building the business out from there, very much sort of organic. So I was doing a lot of it sort of like buying failing stuff. Mm-hmm. So I went through the turgid process of picking up sort of like homes that were either inadequate or requires improvement or retirement sales. And, thanks to Allied Irish Bank, they really supported me a couple of times where I kind of picked up some homes. So we have a home in Dartford, for example, called Haslington Lodge, which was kind of my first major acquisition, sort of 50 bed, and it was failing, 20 people in there. We got it for virtually next to nothing, inadequate CQC, and now here we are in 2025 and it's, one of my best performing homes, 98% occupied for 3 years, 5 good CQC, manager has come from the bottom. She was a carer and now, probably one of our stellar managers, probably looking to a regional support role in future. And that's kind of my sort of bedrock story about how we kind of, where we began and how we sort of traded it out. So I sort of learned the hard way. Mm. And then in recent years, we've kind of had a little bit more growth in terms of now institutional backing and all that sort of stuff, rather than the traditional sort of bank funding. Story started really with my dad wanting some help to exit and, kindly giving me a platform in a way. And yeah, we kind of rebranded and rebuilt from where that was and kind of, Belmont Healthcare kind of as a group kind of came out of 2017, 2018, really, when we kind of really started to go at it. Had a tough period during the pandemic, as most people did, and we were kind of really highly geared, and that was kind of a big learning curve in terms of how to kind of go through and keep a business going. And that's where we kind of repositioned ourselves from being we were very much always going after private funding, which is a lot of people are doing, but we kind of pivoted and we're very much more now high acuity, NHS, hospitals, hospital discharge, sort of 80% of our funding comes from that sort of arena now.
Really?
Which has kind of led me into how do we support that from a technology perspective? How do we kind of do something that's a little bit different? So we definitely sit outside of that private only, purpose-built type stuff. That's not really where we're at. You know, I love the old buildings. I love knocking them about. I love kind of getting them up to scratch. There's so much stuff out there, so much stock that's reusable. So we do a lot of that, that's how we've managed to keep our fees strong, because we look after people that maybe a lot of other care businesses might not want to.
Great. Awesome story. I want to double click on the kind of the turnarounds that you do. Clearly done a really good job with some of your portfolio. What's the secret? What do? You get the keys to a failing care home. What's the playbook?
I mean, there's no magic wand. It's tough. And I mean, I'm never going to stand here and say that the compliance and the CQC side of things is a strong point of mine. I've always been I understand it, but I'm not clinical, and I'm not like a care background. I'm a businessman, and but what I've always focused on is the people. I've always thought that, I use this sort of adage that we're a people business. That's what we are. We're a people and a recruitment-based business. If we don't inspire people to feel happy and kind of want to do this role, then we're not going to give any decent care. So I've always focused on culture, people, keeping our attrition low with various ways, just being a decent person, supporting people, not running with an iron sort of fist, being very open, being, I like to know who we employ and who works with us and who are part of the teams, and encouraging development. We've always been very focused on that. Kind of stems from sort of 2016, 2017. I wrote a book which was all very focused on employing people. It was called Risk versus Reward, the employee versus employer conundrum. So it was all about this kind of theory of, supporting people to want to stay with your business and feel valued and understand what your values are. And we've always done a good job of, when we take places over, that we look at that staff group, we understand where's the pitfalls, what hasn't worked. Because once you get people on board and you support them and you give them the right training, you give them the right sort of vision and foresight, you'll find that, the care improves, the atmosphere improves. And that's where we've always focused ourselves. We've taken over some real failing stuff, and we've rarely lost people, because it's never normally the people's fault. It's sometimes whether it's the guidance or direction or support, and just not being too draconian. And those things have always worked really well for us. And I've always, that's what I always try and sort of pass across in how when we want people to join us, we always want them to kind of be embedded to that.
And so what does that mean practically? Because these are, really great concepts, and I think things that people would love to, lead with and be able to do. But what does that mean practically when you talk about building a great culture?
Okay, so a simple thing is we have a very straightforward onboarding form. So when somebody joins our business, we give them an iPad, and on their first day or the week that they're joining, they're coming to do a buddy shift, support someone, get to know the building. They go through this onboarding form, and it has all your normal stuff, your bank details, your address and all of that, and your health questionnaire. When you go onto the second page, it says, here's the systems that we use. Please download this. So we've got our app for our rostering, our quality and compliance system, our policies and procedures, our handbooks. They can view it all while they're sat there and ask questions about it. And then they flick to the next page once they finish that. And then there's a video from me saying, hi, welcome to the business. If you see me walking around, say hello, I'll say hello back. Trying to encourage people that there is kind of a very flat structure. Obviously we have senior leadership positions, but we don't want people to feel that there is this kind of glass office kind of hierarchy. And that's kind of where I like to think that it starts. It's not all about me by any stretch of the imagination, but it's more about making people realize that we're all human and we understand that. So, and we have some very kind of clear messaging about how we work with people. We want to know, if you have sort of any conditions or health conditions or anything, that will support you with that. It's not, you wouldn't be employed just because there might be an issue. We'd go, right, we want to understand more about how we can support you in that, and then how that can help you fit into the team, whether that's injuries or home life, or how is it that we can support you through that. So that's always kind of the first point. And then we try and be really clear about, this is how open communication, this is how you get paid, this is how you get this. And it sounds really simple, but one of the things that I have learned is how many businesses don't do that. And everyone's always a bit baffled about, where do I find this? Or where do I find this? Or how do I know about this? And they have to ask the questions, and we try and take that away. So I feel like joining a new company is kind of pressure off a little bit. We went down a bit of a laborious process to build kind of our own internal platform, which kind of anybody can view. And it has access to all sorts, like every resource to do with the business, any form, anything to do with what you might want to find. We have like a Q&A, a feedback forms. And then we even have things down to like we have this thing called a resource library. So you can go in and there's all like different managements of different books or podcasts and things that we read or listen to. And you can go on and you can buy copies of them from Amazon, and we pay for that. So it means that people can kind of do a bit of self-development. So we like to do things around that. And then we have kind of a well-being where we support people, like we're doing big drive on menopause at the moment, just because we've got a number of people that are going through that. So we wanted to support people with that. So we give, so it's like free advice, and we do webinars and support for people in that sort of arena. And obviously working with people like the Care Workers Charity, we've built a bit of a platform for kind of like mental health support. I'm a big believer in sort of supporting people through bereavement, because, we have staff that deal with death every day, and sometimes that's not considered. We just kind of just assume that that's okay. But if you're looking after a resident for a year or two and you become quite close to them and the family, and they pass away, and you could have 2 or 3 of that in the same week, we shouldn't ignore that. So it's those little softer touch points, and just not being too draconian with people who need compassionate leave. We just go, it's fine. We always tend to get it back in spades when you support people through those nice little touches, and a lot of it is really soft. But I find that there are a lot of places that don't do it, and especially when we've taken over 4 homes from corporates, and I noticed that cultural difference. We get a lot of people that come to us and give us feedback and say, feel valued, feel like we're not, we feel a little bit more part of it. I mean, I remember we took over from one, and the regional director used to have, there was a photo of this person. I was walking around the home as we were acquiring it. And I kept going, who's this? Every wing I go to, there's a picture of this person with their name and not their role. And I went, why is this there? And they were like, some people had never met them. And I was like, that is just not the right message. So that's the regional director, but there's a picture on the wall to tell you who they are. You shouldn't have to. They should know who they are. So it's little things like that.
It's like having Saddam Hussein on the wall or something like that.
Potentially, yeah. It wasn't ideal. So just little nuances like that. And I mean, some of it will kind of play off at me and say it's a bit silly, but we just try and make it a little bit more fun, a little bit more enjoyable, a little bit more engaging.
And do you worry
we have something called the piss up policy, which people laugh about, but we use our rostering platform to enable people to say, if you want to go out at the weekend with your mates, it's absolutely fine. But you have to use our platform to find somebody to cover your shift. We want you to tell people, look, I want to go out with my mates, 21st, blah, blah, blah. Can somebody cover me for this shift? And the reason that we do it, and then somebody will pick that up and we pay that person a bonus for picking it up. So number of reasons it's worked really well is it reduces our agency. It reduces our need for disciplinary, because people aren't phoning up 5 minutes before a shift and giving us an excuse for sick. And then somebody sees them on Instagram, they've been out, and then they ends up being reported back, and you have to go through all of that motions. The manager ends up having to work a night shift. All of these kind of repercussions. Just putting something as simple in as saying, it's fine, we don't mind you doing that, but it's your responsibility to cover it. And this is the outcome if you don't follow this policy. And it's these little nuances that we've always tried to make it a little bit more fun.
Great. And you talked about how you've taken over homes from big corporates, and that's a big culture change thing. I guess as you grow, do you worry about maintaining that collegiate familial atmosphere?
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
I mean,
how are you going to do that?
It's always the concern. And one of the things that I found is being very clear on those people that join in regional or kind of senior leadership roles within the business are very much aligned to how I think. Recently I recruited what was my, highest level employee that I've ever done in my career, 6-figure salary, somebody that's taken on a big chunk of my work. And finding somebody that has a very similar kind of approach. I think, not rushing those recruitments, sometimes having a gap rather than recruiting somebody for the sake of a person has been really key. I definitely worry that, because we have a target of getting to sort of 25, 30 homes, that we're not going to maintain all of that. Little nuances like that, and constantly sort of educating people as they come in about how we want people to think. And look, I've learned a lesson. We acquired 3 homes recently, and that was a big shock. And I can look back on that now and go, didn't do that right. Need to do that better next time. Need to make sure we get people on board in a better way. Need to not rush it quite so much. So I think that it's always going to be a challenge.
Give me an example of that when you brought these 3 homes on. What mistake did you make?
Well, one of the things was I don't think our communication was as clear as it could have been about how we culturally sort of work. We've had to backfill it. We kind of had to rush through all the process, get it all done, get everybody on board, do all of that. And we were doing all of kind of like the corporate-y stuff that we needed to do to go transactions like that done. And some of the softer approach to getting people to understand who we are and making sure that they were proud that who we are, we're taking over. We missed some of that. We did it a bit later, and I wish that we'd have done it, leading up to takeover rather than after, was something that I learned. So we ended up, we'd done a lot of 360 feedback, and a lot of it was, we love them now, we understand it, but those first couple of weeks felt really onerous. One of the things is we make this mistake a lot, is that we have all of this great stuff like I've just explained to you, and it's all there, but we forget sometimes to connect those people to it, to say, oh, by the way, all of that stuff, it's all here, and let's go through that and let's make sure they understand that. So we've learned that there's certain roles within the business that we need more than others. And sometimes, I always use the phrase admin kills you, but having people who are available to be able to, pick up the phone if somebody's got a concern about how they're getting paid or where this is happening or HR related stuff. And that's one of the things we're investing in a lot now, to have a much more centralized team rather than having it outsourced. So our head office is going to have those functions in-house rather than, kind of using external support for that. And I definitely think, again, it goes to this sort of human piece that we missed that on this one, and we've always been pretty good at it. But this one, we rushed it a little bit. And I think that we definitely learned that we won't do that again. Be much more prepared.
Interesting, because it's not just about, writing it down is a good first step, right? But there's a lot of gap between writing something down and actually, seeing it live and in action. It requires quite a lot of legwork to get to that point, right?
Yeah, we've got so many systems where we know that we've got them, we know that they're there, but are we absolutely certain that everybody understands A, what it's there for, and B, how it's used? And like the platform that I told you about that we've built, there was a lot of people that go, oh, wow, this is amazing, but I wish I'd have known about it on day one. And you kind of just assume sometimes that it's there, and it's in it. And
actually, often what I find in my day job is that it's quite surprising how what you assume people know or what's been communicated, how often maybe they don't know actually. So yeah.
100%. I have a phrase
repetition
that I use, but I don't want to say it because it's got a swear word in it, but it is very much around
space, Adam.
Well, I always say assumptions are the mother of all fuck-ups.
Yeah,
so it's one of the things that I say a lot. Sometimes we fall foul of it. But, now we're in a position where we feel like we've had some good traction and people are kind of bedded into that. And again, we've had minimal attrition, which I'm really, really pleased about. Not losing people is good, and sort of knowing that they're like, oh, you know what, I'm glad about this now. We want people to always feel, because, our job is to buy and build. That's what we do. We're always going to be acquiring. So we've always got to be in this position where we know that we're going to be taking on a cohort of staff, and we need to have, our rollout and our blueprint of that. This is really important because we need to make sure that people are buying into it, because there's never going to be a stage. I'd love to do it one day, but I'm not going to be building something from scratch and sort of filling it, recruiting from empty. It'll always tend to be, where we're taking on, 50 to 100 staff. And, that's a big chunk of people. We're over 500 people now, and making sure that those people understand your core kind of belief as a business is really important. So we're just getting really, really hot on the messaging now.
Great. And you talked about cultural alignment of your leadership team or your management team. What else is important to you when you're building that kind of leadership or management structure and making sure that they're, engaged, doing what, following the mission?
Listening.
Doing a good job.
We do a lot of listening. We do a lot of feedback. We want to make sure that people understand this is how we're going to do things, and this is the reasons why. But also, if people think there's a better way of doing it, or there's some options behind it, embedding people and getting them to feel responsible and have autonomy to have an opinion is so important. And I think it's gratifying as well when people feel like they're listened to and that they can give that feedback. We've just done a round of 360 feedback on, first of all, our management team, but also on what happened during this transition, because we had a big step up, with acquiring 3 homes. And it was interesting hearing some of the feedback, obviously a lot of positives, but also in there some interesting sort of stuff. We go, okay, yeah, we can do that. Yep, I like that. And we've just recently implemented a new sort of process to how we do it. And that came from feedback where somebody had said, why do you do it like this? It doesn't make much sense. This seems a little bit mad to do it like this. We're like, yeah, actually, you've got a fair point. It's not like we've done it like this, but I think that's really important to listen. But we also have that kind of value factual response, because there is listening, but there's also making sure people realize that you can't, just hate the phrase where people say, oh, but this is how we've always done it. Doesn't necessarily mean it's right. So we always need to be kind of fluid and accept that, be a bit more dynamic. So those are definitely some of the key attributes of where we've kind of come from.
Great. And what about taking kind of wider lens at some of the workforce challenges in the sector? What are the storylines that you're seeing?
Well, I don't think that it's interesting, because I don't think the challenges are as challenging as they were. I do think that there is certainly it's definitely calmed down in terms of that. I think the workforce challenges that we face we need to be better as a sector. And I've said this for a long time about how we kind of advertise what our sector is. A lot of the time we're just trying to fill a gap. It's always about fill the gap. But we're not necessarily thinking about, well, what are we telling people about what social care is? Everything out there in the normal press is kind of so negative, and all the positive stuff is centrally within our internal press, which people don't see. You might read something in Care Home Professional or Health Investor or The Care Show or whatever that's awesome, and everyone's high-fiving each other and this is amazing, and you see it on LinkedIn. But those people that are on the outside of it don't see it. So, we went through a massive brand relaunch sort of about 3 months ago. So, new logos, new strapline, new messaging, new kind of website, like really kind of like bolstering forward. And a lot of our content that's getting out there is much more around, rather than having photography of a bed and a bedside table with a nice flower on it. We're very much focused on our people. What are they doing? What's it like to work inside? A lot more video content, a lot more, because we want to kind of grow that attention on sort of social platforms about what it's like to be in the sector, and what fun you can have, what movement you can have in terms of promotion. The fact that we have marketing roles, social media roles, administrative, HR, payroll, finance, marketing, sales. Ultimately, you need to be a good salesperson now in this sector. It's not all about, the care side of things anymore. And I think it's making sure that people understand that. We've got a number of people that have transitioned from care-based roles to more business operations roles. And I think making people understand that the sector is kind of fun and affluent and you're doing something positive, I think is really important. And that will change how people view the sector, which means our application rate will increase, because people won't kind of ignore that job advert when it comes up, because they go, oh, that's care. I don't want to be doing that. That's not me. So I think there's a lot of work to be done around there. We do quite a lot of work in Kent as well with we do a lot of work with the local authority anyway, because we look after a lot of people. But we also do work with their education side, because, we've always been sort of hammering home about the fact that if you're at school or at college and you don't necessarily do very well at GCSEs or A-levels, people will say, well, why don't you do a health and social care MVQ? Well, I don't think it advertises us very well, does it? Because it kind of says, we're not very academic, so do this. And I think you're just changing the messaging and the language about how it's seen, I think is really important. There's a company down in Kent that focus on younger adults, and they do a really good job of talking about, this is the job. Their video content of following some of their team members going out for the day with their cohort of people that they look after, like in the community, or going to the cinema, and start like really sort of focusing on this job includes so many social aspects. It's not just about that very hardcore care, personal care piece, which everyone talks about. There's so much more to it, the value, the support, the fact that you're improving somebody's life, you're part of a family. So I think that in terms of recruitment, we're just heavily focusing on that type of approach to hope that we kind of increase that understanding of what we do. I'll tell you a little anecdote. It's really interesting. So we were doing some recruitment about 6 months ago. We were doing, I was kind of all hell-bent on saying, we want to make it sound more professional, So we were changing the job title. So we call them, everybody within our business, we call them healthcare assistants, like a lot of people do, because it just sounds more professional, sounds more powerful. Yeah, healthcare assistant, we're on that healthcare, we're getting professional and all that. We posted the job called healthcare assistant on Indeed. Application rate was pretty poor. And I just went, okay, change it to care worker, see what happens. We had a 200% increase in applications just by changing it from healthcare assistant to care worker. Care worker doesn't sound as good and doesn't sound as professional. And I wanted people to feel more professional, but the people aren't assuming that that's them. They're going, oh, healthcare professional, that sounds too, or healthcare assistant. Oh, I'm a care worker. And it's kind of that was really interesting message to me, that says that's how people think about themselves making that job role. And so trying to change people's attitudes to that, I think, is a job for all of us in the sector to do. But yeah, recruitment's always going to be challenging because of the kind of what the job is. But if we can do those things, also including the fact, paying better, and also including better kind of support and bonuses. We're very clear on, like I said, cabinet leave, making sure that people are supported, making sure that we're flexible on hours, making sure, we pay bonuses for people rather than overtime, with things like employee of the month and, doing networking stuff for our staff and giving people kind of champion jobs, like we have IT champions and we have champions who, mental health support champions. So trying to give people more than just that. All of those little nuances are things that we're continually kind of evolving to improve on that recruitment.
And you've just even in this conversation dropped in a few like really concrete examples of how you've taken people from, frontline care worker or healthcare assistant to managers, to social media managers, to, central business functions. And I guess like another storyline that goes on in the sector is, the problems around professional development and people, moving on and up in their careers. But it sounds like it's kind of quite an organic thing for you guys. You managed to do pretty well.
Absolutely. We always like to do it internal. There isn't enough training out there for people, I must admit. So a lot of it is kind of done on their personality and then their drive, and we try and do it. It's not like we can stick them on a training course and get them to do it. But we certainly want to try and do that and keep the retention and keep people with us for long periods of time.
Do you think that the way that, sector advocacy works is potentially a bit of a millstone? So, I had a conversation with Professor Martin Green, and he obviously has a very, very loud voice around, as a lot of people within representative bodies do, a very loud voice around some of the challenges facing the sector. And that's great. And I think really important. I wonder how much that filters down to the frontline staff and people who are thinking about the sector and kind of potentially paints a slightly challenged narrative around what's going on.
Yeah, I do. I think sometimes it makes it, like I said, what you see in the press is not what actually happens on the ground. And I think that is disappointing. Social care is always kind of delivered as the runt of the litter, sitting behind the NHS. And sometimes the constant negative narrative, I don't think always helps. I always used to stand up for that. And I was always kind of always going on about that and trying to, back us. And then realised since you made the point that it doesn't necessarily help us always. I think some of that is great if it's internal in the sector. I just think it doesn't always help. I think at the end of the day, what was I doing? It wasn't a podcast. It was something I was talking at an event. I think it was a care show or something like that. And I was typically trying to not be controversial, but trying to make a point. I don't know what it was. I was doing a podcast and they asked me something. They were like, "Oh, how are you finding it at the moment?" And I just went into this kind of like 5-minute discussion about how I felt the sector was. And the lady that was interviewing me said I was the first person who's had on that was being positive about it. And I was just like, well, if you look at the sector as a whole, right, okay, there is all these challenges that you face, but every business faces those. But if you were looking at a business that you felt that you wanted to invest in, grow and develop over the next 10 to 15 years, there's not much outside of healthcare that I'd want to be doing other than tech. But tech is kind of a very niche, it's very, very expensive at the front end to develop something, as I'm sure you know when you built Florence. But, if you're looking to invest in a building and you want to try and raise capital, investment out there is in healthcare because they know that A, it's needed, and B, the buildings are set up to last and people want to invest in bricks and mortar. If you're going to invest in an office block, commercial office building, well, people work from home. So now you've got the challenge of, is it worth doing all that investment? Residential property is going through major challenges with various reasons, as a lot of people, are exiting that market at the moment. Hospitality, again, because of home working and not so much travel, is not necessarily as investable as it used to be, unless you're in the high-end sort of market for holiday, which is, again, high attrition, hard work, very specialised. Well, healthcare is not going to go away. If anything, it's going to increase. Correct. Yeah. And we've only got 147 hospitals in England, and it only covers excluding the private, just under 200,000 people, but is in terms of beds. If you had them full, it's about just under 200,000 in the NHS, including private beds, which is only another 50, 60,000. There's 57 million people in England. So where are all these people going to go? Well, there's 1.8 million care home beds. So care homes are going to be the overflow for that as the market grows, because people are going to need rehabilitation, they're going to need development. So that's where they're going to go. So I'm pretty buoyant about it. I mean, there's a big US investment, Australian investment now coming into the UK. Some of the British investment is kind of picking back up again. Banks are still slow, but it's always the way. Yeah, I'm pretty confident and pretty happy about that this is a sector that I'm in rather than something else. And all of those challenges are just standard challenges that any other business would face. And I'm pretty proud to be in it and can't see me being in anything else, really.
Great. Bit of a segue. So you recently got involved in a company called Alana. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've always been heavily kind of focused on, so part of our business is a domiciliary care. And I've always been kind of a believer in it, in home first, which is kind of a bit counterintuitive when I run care homes. But I've always, my belief is that care homes are going to have a lot less length of stay, which we're seeing. You don't see people 5-6 years anymore. It's more sort of 18 months to 24 months maximum, really. And we're seeing that in our data, ranges from sort of 17 months to sort of, I think our longest is 32 months, but that's quite an anomaly for that home. It's more residential focused. So there's a more high acuity, which is how you get the higher fees, because you have to think to yourself, well, okay, I need high acuity. That's the way I'm going to be able to leverage higher fees rather than just being totally focused on the private market. So that aids with how we develop it. So I've always then thought to myself, why aren't we creating that continuity of care? So our strapline Belmont Healthcare is for your care journey. So I always want people to, you don't want it all to be a crisis decision. You don't want somebody to suddenly go, oh, I need social care. What do I do? So we started developing our home care business. And when we were doing that, we're doing a bit of home care, not massive, but we started doing it and supporting people in their own home. And my plan was always to have that as something that ran across all of my homes, which meant that we could, if they came to us, they could come into the home, go through some rehab, then we help them go home, stay at home for years. And then eventually when they need to come back, they come back to us. So instead of having a client or an individual for 16, 17 months, we could potentially have them 5 or 6 years. And we're improving their quality of life because they're at home for longer. My nan is 95. Our team look after her. She's at home still, an hour a day of care every week just helps her with that confidence of being at home, creating this kind of mindset that, I can still live at home for as long as possible. What I always wanted to do with that, but I just did not have the bandwidth, was to turn it into a subscription-led tech service, which means that people could be able to apply, go online, source care, book care, and have various other kind of organic ecosystem around that. Delusions of grandeur, because trying to do that on my own was impossible. And then in the village that I live in, I went into an off-license, which is also a craft brewery, and I was wearing a Belmont Healthcare hoodie, and somebody said to me, you're in healthcare, aren't you, Adam? You need to talk to Alex. He's got this startup. I was like, okay. And he lived in the same village as I do. So we were introduced via this, and we sat down and having a chat, and he was developing and had started this platform with the founder, a guy called Jonathan Glover, who founded this business based on the fact that he had a terrible time trying to find care for his parents. And it kind of evolved that we had the same pathway, which was they wanted to create a technology-led home care service which enabled people to have an ecosystem. And all of these things that I'd always believed in, suddenly I had bandwidth and resource to do it. So just over a year ago, got involved with Alana, which was at the time called CareSite, but we were really keen to take care out of the word and make it very much more accessible, probably similar to maybe what yourselves did with Florence, because I get what that means in terms of the name, and you kind of link it back rather than it, having care written in it. And it started from there. And one of the things that we really found was this kind of how we approach the customer, how we approach the individual, how we find them. And it was very much around helping with assisted discharge, helping people go home. So essentially, it's an app with an ecosystem where all carers are on the platform. They're all signed up to it. Carers choose how much they get paid. So again, we're giving back to the individual. So if they want to get paid X amount per hour, that's what they put on their job spec, that this is how much I would like to be paid for doing it. And then it's up to the individual customer to choose whether they're happy to do that. It details their qualifications, their training, their support. There's a little video. They can meet the person via FaceTime. They can book appointments with them. They can also then create a subscription model, and it becomes direct debit. So it's constant, if they have hours of care. We have a reporting system within it, which we call the happiness report, which is soon to be changed to, we're changing the name of that. That is kind of just telling the individual, the care individual who's delivering the care and also the family how those visits are going, whether that's from what happened, what's care, but it's also that you can rate each other, very similar to Uber, so people can start to see what it's like to deal with each other and who, what kind of care you're going to be coming into. And then we're building on that. Soon you'll be able to book GP appointments through the app and have online GP appointments, meaning that people aren't able to go home. We're working on a partnership at the moment to have assisted sort of monitoring within the home, which also feeds through the app. So movement, noise, being able to sort of call out and say, I've got a problem. It pings the app, it pings the family in the care room. We've got attention going to these individuals, using AI to sort of understand how people's movement around the home is going, using sort of various bits of equipment such as Alexa. And there's also another company, which I can't talk about just now, that we're working with, that we're going to be kind of partnering with the platform where we can put assisted units around the home. We're also partnering with Uber Eats, so that within the app, if you're in hospital, you can go through the app, speak to Uber Eats, go to Morrison's. Morrison's can then get a pack, get sent to the house. So when you get there, you've got your groceries ready for when you come out of hospital, you come home. We're also working with a company called Whippet, a guy called Matt Oxley, where you can, if you need any hospital equipment like beds or, hospital beds or units to go around the toilet or anything in the home to make it more accessible, that you can also order those through the app so they get delivered and they're prepared and they're ready for when you come out of hospital. So this idea of where we're coming out of hospital with high needs of care and then supporting them to lower that need of care because we're rehabilitating, and then people can stay at home for longer. So it's kind of all of those kind of like desires and wants that I wanted to do with what was called Belmont at Home, which we still run. Ilana is giving us the ability to grow that, nationally and have a team of people. So we've got a, set up head office in London, and we've got a number of customers, and, we're in double figures of a number of hospitals that we're working on discharges to get people out. And that's growing, and super excited about it, actually, because I think that as we develop and increase that kind of revenue, that we can reinvest in the technology, and the plan is to have a full-blown kind of ecosystem of supporting people in their own home.
Amazing. Very inspiring. A lot of work to do, though, Adam.
It is, but that was the problem is that, like a lot of entrepreneurs, you kind of think you can do it all on your own. And then one of the things that I've really enjoyed in the last year is realizing that, trying to, finding multiple people like-minded who you could kind of bring together. I've never really leveraged my network. Didn't realize how many people I knew and how many people kind of would want to help each other until started this journey. And, Alex, the chief exec, is driving that absolutely. And, I'm kind of a small cog in supporting it and, chipping in where I can. And I know that I've never been able to build something like that because there's so many people out there with ideas. I'm sure you come across it all the time. It's easy to have an idea. It's executing it and delivering it, which is the tough bit, which is obviously what yourself and Dan did with Florence. You executed on an idea when you had it. And, you probably learned the same. Like, you've got to have like technology people around you, developers, and kind of people who can drive it on a day-to-day basis. Trying to run Belmont, and that was never, ever going to happen. So I'm super pleased that, that happened. If it wasn't for going to the off license with a hoodie on, it would have never have happened. That was a great thing.
There's the lesson. We should all spend more time in off licenses.
Yeah. And also you should wear branded clothing. Wear branded clothing.
Totally. Great.
But super excited about Ilana.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that, Adam. That's been a really fascinating conversation. Last thing, what's your message of optimism for people working in social care?
Message of optimism is I think it's such a creative and exciting place to be if you are willing to put everything into it. I think there's so many options for you to be able to do things. If you've got that kind of mindset, I think you'll find if you speak to any kind of leader of care businesses, probably 80% of them probably didn't do it in the first place. It wasn't their kind of where they started, but there was a reason for it. It might be that they were an accountant, or they dealt with a healthcare business in the past, or they have asset-backed businesses, or they've be the developer, and all of those things come into play in this sector. You need marketing, you need to be a salesman, you need to be able to raise money, you need to be able to hold a constructive kind of corporate conversation with banking and all of that. And I just think it's a really good place to work. And then you've got so many exciting things that are being built around the sector. There's so many kind of platforms and tech, like yourself, you're in it. There's some really good things that are being built. I just think that there's all that optimism, and I'm super optimistic. I just think that there needs to be a little bit more of knitting it together. I still think that there's lots of people doing great little stuff in little silos. I think if we can bring all of that together and then really go and bang the door to somebody in the NHS to go, you do realise that we've built all of this over here. and we can really help you over here,
Mm.
not only save money, but probably save lives.
Yeah.
Maybe we could just have that, a little bit more pragmatic conversations about that. That's the one thing for me that I'd really like to build, but super optimistic.
Great. Adam, thank you very much. It's been great to talk to you.
Pleasure.
See you soon.
Thanks, Giles.